Okay, welcome everybody. So I will officially start now the seminar. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. So since we are in a webinar, we will keep the question in a question and answer, and we will read them aloud and answer to those that we pick up. Also, I have two screens. So if I look up, I look at a bigger screen. So don't be surprised. I'm not just looking out of the window, also because it's very gray here in Brussels. So there's nothing to look at, really. So again, I welcome everybody. I am your moderator today. My name is Flaminia Tacconi, senior lawyer at ClientEarth, and I work on decarbonisation and subsidies in the fisheries sector. I would like to start this webinar, given the actual context of climate and biodiversity crisis and the urgent need to change our whole economic model to less polluting, less resource intensive, and less energy intensive one, including in the fisheries sector. I wanted to start with a few words of introduction inspired by a famous visionary and adapted to the topic of today. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair, I say to you today, my friends. And so, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the European values of solidarity and justice. And I have a dream for the EU fisheries sector of an energy transition that is socially and environmentally just. I have a vision for a decarbonisation of the fisheries sector that progressively leads to a greenhouse gases neutral fisheries using less energy intensive and less destructive fishing gears. Decarbonisation will go hand in hand with a transition towards low-impact fisheries, allowing the ocean and fish to play their role as climate regulators and natural carbon sinks, and to thrive as part of an healthy marine ecosystem. Coastal communities will prosper thanks to the sustainable activities of their local fishers, but also thanks to the beauty of the marine environment they will feel responsible for, will protect, honor, and valorize. Fisheries will be primarily dedicated to fish for human consumption, and consumers will have learned to eat less but better seasonal fish that has been sustainably fished in EU waters. And this exciting and needed decarbonisation process started with the publication by the European Commission of the Energy Transition Action Plan in last February, so 2023, and with the launch of a stakeholder dialogue in June. On the 28th of November, the first stakeholder workshop will take place and will address the financing of the energy transition through crucial questions such as the respective roles of public and private funding, their complementarities, and the challenges that each financial stream bring along. We expect other thematic workshops to follow, and this dialogue is designed to support the European Commission in developing a roadmap for decarbonisation of the fisheries sector with targets and hopefully deadlines that will be included in the national plans and priorities for overall decarbonisation. The European Commission has also promised to develop guidance for the financing of the energy transition. And in the same spirit of dialogue and exchange, ClientEarth and Oceana have organized this short webinar as active actors of this very dialogue. And we are very excited to hear how financing decarbonisation should work from our three speakers today. First, Ariel Sutherland-Sherris, policy advisor at Oceana Europe, working on sustainable fisheries management with an education background in oceanography and coastal management. And she will present Oceana's vision for financing the just transition towards net zero sustainable EU, in particular through having clear financing priorities and criteria. Then we will listen to Charles Berkow, policy analyst at the Stockholm University Baltic Sea Centers since 2019. He is an economist by academic training and environmental policy a generalist for about 3 decades, working both in environment, government, and NGOs. And he will present to us 5 ground rules for decarbonization from an economic perspective. And finally, we have Brian O'Riordan, who is policy advisor at LIFE, Low Impact Fishers of Europe, and he will present the perspective of small-scale coastal fishers in this exciting but also very challenging path of decarbonization. So I will pass now the floor to Ariel. I will mute myself and talk to you later.
Okie dokie. I will just share my screen. All right. So, first of all, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. As mentioned, my name is Ariel Sutherland-Sheriff, and I will be speaking on behalf of Oceana in Europe today to share with you some considerations related to funding opportunities to make EU fisheries more sustainable, decarbonized. So, first of all, we know that there has been ambitious EU targets that have been set in Europe to move the sector towards net zero fisheries, and more globally, we know that we're trying to move the entire Europe to carbon neutral by 2050. So there's a roadmap expected by 2024 for fisheries, and this is very promising. Unfortunately, we know that global progress to meet the Paris Agreement is falling short, which risks the Paris Agreement targets, and world leaders are being called to further blue their climate action plans to ensure that we're resolving this indeed climate ocean biodiversity nexus challenge that we are facing, and fisheries, though a very small piece, is no exception, and the opportunity to transform it is immediate. So I would like to start off by emphasizing a few points that were mentioned in the latest UN Ocean Dialogue report. So first of all, we know indeed the ocean is key for climate action. Tackling biodiversity loss and restoring marine environments is essential to support Paris Agreement targets. There was also a lot of mention of the need to adopt a systems approach, an ecosystem-based management approach to decarbonize the whole value chain of sectors, so including fisheries, and really the need to recognize the role of aquatic food productions within the carbon cycle. So when we're thinking about fisheries, it's both impacted and impacting the climate change and the general nexus challenge that we are facing. So we know that fisheries emits emissions. This also renders the sector incredibly financially vulnerable. At the same time, we know that fish, as mentioned, are very important to be considered in the carbon cycle, and unsustainable fishing practices can not only deplete stocks, it can disrupt food webs, it can disrupt this biological carbon pump, and it can also weaken ecosystem resilience. And despite good intentions in Europe, and despite very good European fisheries regulations, there is still a lack of implementation when it comes to meeting the targets that we are setting towards sustainable fisheries management. And this includes deadlines to end overfishing, or to restore healthy fish stocks and shellfish stocks in Europe. And this really is important to emphasize the need for the systems approach towards decarbonizing the sector. And the good news is the EU has plenty of funding tools available to decarbonize and allow this transition to net zero EU fisheries. I won't go through all of them. However, I would like to highlight that under MFAF, there is local development possibilities for bottom-up approaches to decarbonizing that can really empower the sector to take the transition within their own hands and really make the transformation. There's also, of course, national support through state aid, and private investment is going to be key to decarbonize and fill these gaps where funding isn't available at the EU level. And of course, all of this can support training, research, pilot projects, amongst other things. But indeed, we do face some significant challenges when it comes to decarbonizing the fisheries sector. Now, one big challenge that is not only applicable to the fisheries sector, but we need to make sure that we're fundamentally changing fisheries capital to what is needed to mitigate and adapt to climate change. We want to make sure that it facilitates a just transition to net neutral and less harmful fishing practices, and ultimately a model that ensures that societal needs are met within the planetary boundaries, which isn't currently the case. And of course, we know that maintaining fuel subsidies and fossil fuel support for the fisheries sector is, it has implications. One being that it removes some incentives to invest in the net zero transition. It also allows fleets to remain profitable and stay out longer at sea, even if potentially there isn't enough stocks available to do so for them to remain profitable. And of course, there is indeed a lack of clarity when it comes to the cost implications of this transition, also on clarity on the total available funding opportunities to allow this transition, and securing fair access to funds so that all fishers can decarbonize. This indeed hasn't always been the case when it comes to fisheries funds at the national level. So another aspect is also there needs to be clear policy signals, and we expect a roadmap which will be able to improve these signals. But without these, it will be difficult to guide where funding needs to be prioritized to decarbonize the sector. And in terms of funding principles for funding, overarching this is the need to ensure that funding allows that societal needs are met within the planetary boundaries. We need criteria that ensures that we're supporting only decarbonisation and nature valuing, transitioning away from fossil fuel support. We need to ensure a fair playing field when it comes to transitioning fishers towards low impact, decarbonised sector. That ensures that also requires making sure that those that have been the least recipient to funds are given fair access to funds. We also need clear information on funding, clear information on pathways to access these funds, and this needs to be underpinned by a robust roadmap, policy roadmap that really drives the direction of funding. And of course, I won't dwell on this for very long, but there are a lot of funding opportunities. And where we would like to see financing being funneled is in a range of areas. I will list a few, which includes ensuring better implementation of existing fisheries regulation. This means really adopting a systems-based approach to fisheries management, ending overfishing, ensuring that we're giving access to fishing opportunities to those who fish better, not those who fish more, ensuring we have good, robust reporting and monitoring of greenhouse gas emissions and sustainability criteria for alternative fuels, so that we know that the fuels that have the most benefit to transform the sector is given priority for investments. So overall, my take-home messages for you today is that in order to decarbonize the sector, we need to make sure that we're addressing the impact of fishing on emissions and also the impact of fishing on the marine environment. This is crucial. And we have funding available. We must act now. There are challenges, but with some rules in place, with some guidance and funding tracking to make sure we're directing funds and making sure that if they're not directed in the right place, we can change this, is necessary. And ultimately, we need to redirect funding away from destructive practices towards fully allowing the decarbonisation of the fishery sector. I have included references as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ariel. We will move to the presentation of Charles and collect all the question and answer at the end of the 3 presentations. So feel free to already write your question and answer in the chat if you want. Charles, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Just making sure that I get the right thing opened here. So I hope it looks good. Okay, and thank you very much for Flaminia for inviting me here to talk. And thanks to all of you who are listening and watching. And thanks also, Ariel, for a really nice presentation. It will make my part in a way easier. I'm going to be talking about 5 ground rule considerations for decarbonizing the fishing fleet. The first is to re-emphasize a point that Ariel made, and that's that we need stronger fishing stocks. Measures to reduce the carbon footprint of fisheries, the kind of funding that Ariel was speaking about, will be less effective and less efficient as long as the fish stocks are still depleted. Because, obviously, you need more energy to catch the same amount of fish when you have less fish to chase. At present, the Commission and the member states actually do not ask ICES, the scientists at ICES, to provide the information about what level of stocks will be needed to produce MSY, which is the main objective of the CFP. So it's not so surprising that these levels are not met, and there's a lot left to be done in that area. But I will move on to the next point, and that's the need for a price for carbon emissions. This is also something that Ariel addressed a bit. And again, measures to reduce the carbon footprint of fisheries, that's the kind of funding, among other things, that Ariel was speaking about, will be less effective and less efficient as long as fishing is exempt from the EU carbon pricing. Because obviously, again, that will give less incentives for using fuel efficiently. That will give less incentives for seeking non-fossil alternatives. It has less pressure to reduce the overcapacity that's the main problem in the fishing fleet, and it will mean more pressure on the fish stocks in the environment. Subsidies in the form of exemptions from fuel taxes are classed in research as harmful subsidies. Also, this is referring a little bit to the WTO obligation to remove harmful subsidies to fisheries due to their negative impact on fish stocks and the marine environment. So this is really crucial to remove these subsidies. The third point is that there are synergies, positive synergy effects between the climate, fish stocks, and the environment. And it's really smart to try to achieve these synergies. So reducing the subsidies on fishing via the exemptions on carbon prices for fuel, that would be good, both from the point of view of climate policy. It would be good for fish stocks via less fishing pressure. It would be good for the marine environment. And if done in the right way, it can also be good from a social perspective. But the question is, will this triple win be achieved? Because it is, as it is now, fisheries are exempt from the emissions trading system. There seems to be a blockage to the Commission proposal to put a minimum, very low, but still a tax on emissions from fisheries. And in terms of the other main policy tools that are left, that is the effort sharing regulation and the emissions trading system 2 from 2027, there are implicitly obligations on fishing to put some kind of a carbon price or something similar, but a lot of this needs to be done on the member state level, and that means that there will be level playing field challenges for reaching all of this. I move on to the next point, and that is that there's a lot of error under the EU's capacity ceiling. So there's been some discussion about the capacity rules of the EU, and therefore it's good to take a step backwards and recall why are these capacity rules in place. And the Green Paper from 2009 from the Commission made it very clear that overcapacity is a root cause to a lot of the problems that we have in the fishing sector. It contributes to depleted stocks. It means that more effort is needed per ton fish. And that in turn contributes to poor profitability, which in turn contributes to poor compliance. Further, the EU capacity ceilings have a lot of air under them, because already the Green Paper was saying that there's a technological creep of about 2 or 3% per year. That is an actual increase in the capacity to catch fish. And if you go in the 10 years since these capacity ceilings were set, that means that with 75% of the capacity ceiling that was set in 2013, you can catch as much fish as if you'd use the full capacity. Some efficiency measures can actually increase capacity. So that's also a problem. And it was said in an exchange of views with the PESH committee by the commissioner that most countries have, on the average, 25% error under the capacity ceilings already. So this is really not a constraint. Finally, I think it's important to have a farm-to-fork perspective instead of a pipe-to-port perspective when looking at the carbon emissions, because a focus on fuel use per ton fish risks sub-optimization from a climate perspective. For example, fuel use and land use impacts of growing biofuel feedstocks need to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, you're going to risk doing the wrong thing. Another example is the apparent efficiency of small pelagic fisheries used for fish meal is eaten up by the time it gets to the plate when it's used as fodder for farmed fish. Now, a lot of these numbers are not there yet, but even if you don't have numbers, it's still valuable and important to take these aspects into consideration, at least try and identify the impacts that are relevant and that can be identified, to try and quantify those that can be quantified, to try and valorize those that can be valorized, and to list those that you've at least identified but not managed to quantify and valorize. As an economist, I'm a bit resistant to subsidies and support, but all the things that I've mentioned up to now, and that also Ariel was mentioning, they are necessary in order to get some kind of an effective and efficient decarbonization, but they might not be sufficient. And if so, then you might need the kind of support that Ariel was talking about. But again, this support, to sum up, is a supplement, not a substitute for measures for stronger fish stocks and for a price on carbon emissions, first. And secondly, that it has to be done within the framework of the national and EU capacity ceilings and a farm-to-fork approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charles. As a lawyer, I'm always inspired by this magical language of economists. So thank you for giving this contribution. And Brian, now you're welcome to do your presentation. Just an addition concerning the question and answer part, as it is so dry just to have us talking, for those who want to ask questions, I will allow you to talk. I have this power as the host. So I will give you the floor, the real floor, not only the written floor. So do not hesitate. But now, for the moment, we will listen to Brian.
Thanks very much, Flaminia. Thanks to my colleagues, Ariel and Charles, for very interesting and thought-provoking presentations. Much food for thought and much grist to the mill. So I've not got a presentation other than a few notes here, but Live Low Impact Fishers of Europe will be publishing a perspective on the decarbonisation in the fisheries sector in the next days. So these few notes are based on that. So I think the first point I'd like to make is that decarbonisation of the fleet on its own will not go very far towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And especially, as Charles pointed out, if we only focus on the pipe to pork or the well to wake, if we only look at the fishing sector without looking at the downstream post-harvest value chains, then we're only talking about something like 0.01% contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions from the EU fisheries sector, and something like 0.003% if we look at the small-scale sector. So also, as Charles noted, healthy stocks require a lot less energy to catch and create a lot more employment. So if we look for efficiencies, not so much in terms of the units of carbon used to tons of fish caught, but rather in terms of the socioeconomic benefits generated, then I think this is a much more important way of gauging efficiency of decarbonisation. And particularly if we want healthier stocks, then decarbonisation must be part of a wider process towards low environmental impact fishing. That means reduced dependency on fossil fuels, obviously, but also the fossil fuel derivatives, such as the plastics and polymers that are used in the fishing gears, are used in the packaging materials, used in the storage and cold storage of fish. So we want a lower impact on fish stocks, a lower impact on the food web, because we want the marine environment to work for us to reduce carbon in terms of sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and so on. But also we want to see the greater socioeconomic benefits that are going to be generated distributed more equitably. So when we look at the post-harvest side of fisheries, it's difficult to gauge exactly what the carbon emissions are, because these value chains are extremely complicated and energy intensive, with products traveling huge distances for processing and marketing, products going from the European Union to Asia and then back again, with a very high dependence on plastics and fossil fuels and other fossil fuel derivatives, which is clearly not sustainable. So what I would like to emphasize here is small-scale fisheries could be part of the solution, providing jobs and socioeconomic benefits in areas with few alternatives, employing, as they do, over 50% of the seagoing fishing workforce, and being far more suited to short-chain, direct marketing, less energy-intensive arrangements. So getting on to the point of financing. Financing for decarbonisation needs to be part of a wider strategy for financing the redesign and modernisation of the EU fishing fleet, in line with a whole range of new challenges that the fishing fleet faces, including global warming and associated climate change, invasive species and so on, but also from spatial squeezing from the blue economy. As we know, offshore renewables are going to take up much more marine area. Aquaculture is being supported to expand. And also we face changing demographics in the fishing sector, increasing age of fishing populations and a lack of generational renewal. Also, along with the average age of EU fishing vessels being over 35 years old, it's questionable whether investing in solely new engines and new fuels is really going to be worthwhile when you're dealing with such old vessels. The next point I'd like to pick up on from Charles and Ariel and Flaminia indeed is giving priority for fishing for direct human consumption. Life believes that there is a need to rethink the current EU fisheries model and promote a general reduction in the use of energy across the fisheries sector. This means implementing a strategy that shifts us away from carbon-intensive, high-volume, high-impact fishing to low-carbon, high-value, low-impact fishing. So meeting the objectives of both the Marine Action Plan and the energy transition will in all likelihood require phasing out of some kinds of fishing operations, whilst giving priority to those fishing activities which have the least environmental impact and the greatest socioeconomic benefits. In this regard, fishing for direct human consumption should be given priority over reduction fisheries for fish meal and oil, given the very high energy requirements and inefficient use of the latter. The use of fish meal, as Charles noted, as a feed ingredient in agriculture and aquaculture is also extremely wasteful of energy and the carbon stored in fish biomass with significant energy conversion losses. Hand in hand with the energy transition, would like to see a rights transition, recognizing the importance of sustainable and viable small-scale fisheries in inshore fisheries. And through this process, we would like to see quota fishing opportunities and fishing spaces being reserved for low-impact fishing using a mechanism such as in Article 17 that Flaminia referred to, with priority access granted to small-scale passive gear nano enterprises within the 12-mile fishing zone. I see that my time is used up, so I'll end there. Thank you very much.
You can, no, Brian, you can finish your thoughts. I mean, we're not that strict and you were all very good. So finish your thought and then we will go to the question and answer. Thank you.
Okay, so looking at the issue of a fair energy transition that is socially and environmentally just, one of the criteria is that no one is left behind. And particularly in the small-scale fishing sector, we've seen a common fisheries policy that for the last 4 or 5 decades has discriminated against smaller scale fishing activities, favouring larger scale, higher volume extraction. With notable exceptions, support for the development of the sector has gone to larger scale activities. Not only is this seen in terms of investment in new gear and new vessels, but also in terms of the market support provided to producer organizations. What we would like to see is the supports that Charles referred to being given to collective projects rather than to individual projects in terms of investment in infrastructure, investment in supporting small-scale fisheries to have their own producer organizations, which is currently not the case, and in supporting services and training. After all, public money should be used for public good rather than individual gain. The next point is that at the moment, whilst, as Ariel pointed out, there are alternative fuels and propulsion systems existing for the maritime sector, there are no off-the-shelf, economically viable options or solutions to meet the needs of the highly diverse small-scale fishing fleet. Several options will involve a rethink on how fishing is done. For instance, how you use deck space both to use sails and haul and set your fishing gear and handle the fish. In terms of vessel design, for example, how batteries or alternative fuels will be stored on the vessels and what this will mean for stability. So this has a whole range of implications which need to be looked at. So if we're talking of alternative carbon neutral propulsion options, we also need to be looking at a whole range of new vessel designs. The implications also for new infrastructure and value chains for the distribution of new fuels, of distribution points for energy, will also have an impact on smaller scale harbours, decentralized away from the larger distribution centres. So my last point is that all this requires a differentiated approach for decarbonisation, one for small-scale fishing, which is a much more decentralised, smaller enterprise economy, and another one for larger-scale fishing fleets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much, everybody, for the presentation. And obviously, we raise many more issues than only the strict financial issues. So I hope that our colleague who I saw in the attendees, Francisco Nicolian, we get super inspired for the next workshops. But for the moment, we are all here. So please feel free to ask questions. I will give you the floor. And so you can introduce your question in the question and answer chat point. Yeah, we have a first. So I will enable Francisco to ask the question directly. Sorry, I need just to be to do it. I think I need to go to the attendees. Francisco, I will give you the floor. Give me 2 minutes. There you go.
Do you hear me? Hello, but you don't see me, I suppose.
Well, I think it depends on you putting the video on, but I'm not sure.
I couldn't manage to put the camera, but okay. Hello, good morning to everybody, and many thanks for first of all organizing this webinar and for your presentations. Actually, it's better that you don't see me because I'm covered. It's very cold in the office. We are trying to get the just transition by reducing the heating in the big commission building. So I don't know. It's a bit difficult here. Anyways, okay. So no, many thanks. And as Flaminia said, I'm very much interested to hear your interventions and the different discussions, because next week we're organizing the first workshop under the ETP, the Energy Transition Partnership, which is about financing. I heard the interventions very good, and I'm always very keen to hear the different opinions. I don't want to enter to this technical thing, about subsidies. And I just want to say that, first of all, most probably you do know that the EU fishing fleet has reduced its CO2 emissions since 2008 by 15 to 19%. And this is due because we had the better state of the stocks. So actually what Charles said in his presentation is absolutely correct. We need to have better stocks in order to already start this energy transition, and this is actually, we see some results from the CFP. Now, I'm a bit, about the big ones or the small vessels, the big vessels, financing also, it's very difficult. We're going to discuss it. I don't want to prejudge the discussions, which we will have next week. But Brian, a question for you, from your experiences and your discussion with the fishers, would you think that for the small-scale coastal fisheries, the battery technology would be the most suitable one? I'm just thinking, going out for a one-day trip, the battery or hybrid technology will be one which can be easily, let's say, and we do have the technology today to be, let's say, installed and trying to, and also because under NFAF, such kind of vessels are eligible for financing. So I'm just wondering, what is your opinion on this?
Thanks, Franciscos. It's always good to hear from you. You've always got interesting and positive things to say. The battery is a great technology. The problem is it's not an off-the-shelf option at the moment for many small-scale operators. One of the problems with batteries is they tend to overheat, and how to keep the batteries cool and stopping them catching fire or causing fire on board is one aspect. The other aspect is the weight. where do you put the battery? Because a battery is quite heavy and can affect the stability of the boat and take up space where you might otherwise store fish. So I think in principle, yes, the battery is a great technology, but like all the options we're looking at when we look at alternative fuels, is it creates not problems, but creates challenges in terms of how you store the new fuel or where you store the battery, and also in terms of how long you can spend at sea. I mean, the batteries are getting better and better, but in terms of having the power you need to get home safely, having got out to the fishing grounds, to have the additional power when you need it if the weather changes, all of these kinds of considerations are there. So it's not a simple, yes, batteries are great, but yes, they could be under certain circumstances. But thanks a lot for the question. It's a very
thank you, Brian. Thank you very much for your reply.
Okay, we have the next question from Madame Martine Vallot. So I will allow you to talk in a second. I need to find you. Oh, okay, there you go. And I can even promote you to panelists, and then you can put your video on.
Could you just read my questions, please?
Yes, I can also read your question. So Madame Vallot asks, what do you think about the WTO decision on fishing? And there is also another one, actually, that we didn't mention the different types of fishing gear. Is it possible to decarbonize without stopping bottom trawling? So we have two questions. Is it possible to decarbonize without stopping bottom trawling? And then there is a question, what do you think about the WTO decision on fishing subsidies? So I would like to open the floor to those who want. Maybe the WTO question is more directed to Charles, and the one on bottom trawling is for who wants the floor. Charles, shall I start with you?
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing about the WTO decision on fishing subsidies was, why did it take so long? It was over 20 years since they made the decision to make an agreement on that. And then it was also several years after the SDG had a specific point about reducing harmful subsidies. I checked out the other day, and there was still not nearly enough countries had sent in their formal letters of acceptance in order for this to enter into force. And then, as always, like, the devil is in the details, and I have to confess, I'm not aware enough about the details. But a question that I was asking myself when I was trying to figure it out is, the processes that the EU has underway, will they be enough to fulfill the WTO requirements? If they are, then the WTO requirements aren't strong enough. And if they aren't, then the EU has some homework to do. I hope that can answer at least some of your question, but I'm sorry, I can't give better than that.
Thank you very much. Charles, I don't know if you want to follow up Madame Vallot again, or otherwise, Brian, I will give the floor to Brian, who would like to intervene on the question on bottom trawling.
Thanks very much. Very moot question, very topical question. There's a lot of discussion about trawling at the moment. But I think the first thing to bear in mind about trawling is that it's not a homogeneous gear. You have beam trawls, you have pelagic trawls, you have otterboard trawlings, and in recent years we now have something called a some-wing trawl, which instead of a beam, it uses a hydroplane and hydroplanes to keep the gear off the bottom. So there are so many developments going on in gear design that to say that bottom trawling as a homogeneous gear must be phased out because it's the only way to achieve carbon neutrality is really oversimplifying the subject. I think we need to look at bottom trawling in its entirety and specify exactly what the different carbon footprints of different kinds of trawling are, and looking at the way that gears are being developed. And something for your diaries, I don't know how it's who's going to be there, but I know that in the Parliament next week, I think on the 28th, there is a webinar and a meeting about can bottom trawling be sustainable? So I think these are questions which need to be asked. There are no simple black and white solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. On the 28th, though, we are all busy. We know that. We are all at the Commission's workshop.
Yeah, anyway, have a look at the Parliament website.
Ariel, the floor is yours. Go.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add a point concerning the last question related to bottom trawling. I fully agree with Brian. Indeed, different fishing practices have a different footprint. And when we're talking about decarbonisation, we really need to take an ecosystem approach when looking at the impact of fishing techniques. And when indeed bottom trawling does have a footprint in terms of its selectivity, bottom impact. And so in order for it to fit into a net zero fishery sector, we need to ensure that we truly transform it through technological developments and so forth. And indeed, we also need to be looking at the impact that it also could have on the seafloor and carbon storage, which at the moment there's quite a lot of debates surrounding the magnitude of impact. But indeed, we know that it can impact the distribution of carbon within the seabed. So these sort of considerations are definitely needed when we're thinking about decarbonising bottom trawling practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if there is follow-up questions. Otherwise, I don't see any other raised question in the chat. Brian has shared a document. No, he has shared in the chat. We have the link to register for the event. So don't be shy. Feel free to ask more questions. We have still 10 minutes left. Okay. Okay. If no one else has questions, we can also close this webinar earlier than planned. I think we had very nice exchanges. I will continue to monitor the question answer tab, but I would like also to take this opportunity to maybe summarize a couple of key takeaways that I heard from my colleagues. So from what I heard from Ariel, she underlined that decarbonization means not just fewer emissions, but also fewer ecosystem impacts, and with precise environmental and social criteria for the distribution and allocation of funding, at least public funding. From Charles, what I retain is that financial measures to decarbonize the fishing fleet will be more expensive and less effective unless fish stocks are restored and unless subsidies are in the form of fuel taxation are not eliminated. And from Brian, we heard a lot of things that are going from in all direction of the fishing sector. I think that he does agree both, I think, with Ariel and Charles, which is good. So we have common ground. But he also underlined that the decarbonization of the EU fishing fleet on its own will contribute next to nothing to greenhouse gases reduction and will be costly and complicated. And he shared with us the conviction that decarbonization needs to go hand in hand with a more profound fisheries reform to establish a fit-for-purpose 21st century fisheries sector, which goes actually hand in hand with my presentation, my starting point. So we close the circle as we need to do in life. and we need to have a fishery sector future-proofed against global warming, associated climate change impacts, compatible with blue and green economy development, and supporting decent livelihoods and providing socioeconomic benefits in coastal communities. I would also add that these coastal communities should be nourished and protected, as they are so important for the social fabric in those areas. Having reached the end of the webinar, since there are no more questions, I still see, I would like to thank you all for joining the webinar, including Dave, who is on the panelist. He has helped us technically to be able to run this webinar, so I'm very grateful to him. And we would like also to share with you our new website where you can find information with reports. So I think Dave will share just the outline, and then we can maybe also put in the chat the link to the webinar. This website will be updated regularly. So, for example, also the registration of this webinar will be available there. I don't know if, Dave, you have issues sharing actually the page?
No, I just shared it now. I was just resharing the link that Brian had.
Yeah,
That's
and
it.
maybe you can share it so that we can see it on the as a presentation rather. So
Okay, yeah, a moment.
So you can see the nice outline. As you know, website is a lot of work, so we are very proud to to show it live to those who have joined the webinar. And also, I would say we look forward to see and meet you at the next workshop of the Commission on the 28th of November. So there you go. Here is our brand new website where you will find also previous reports. Okay. Well, I would say that it's time for us to say goodbye. Thank you very much again. Maybe we can close it, Dave, and we can say bye looking at the screen. Thank you. Have a lovely day. Thank you very much. I will end the meeting for all. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.